Good evening, everybody. How are you all? Group 14, are you fine? Alleged. Na mtawapunza kazi tena. Sawa. First of all, thank you very much for coming this evening. It's a packed night here at Drunken Lectures. My name is John Alan Namu, as you heard.
I'm Justin Wanda. Hi, everyone.
And I'm Tom Ukwana. Hi, everyone.
And together every week, every Monday from about 6 p.m., we present a podcast called The Big Picture. Big topics. Some of the people who are in the audience today are some of our previous guests, but today you guys are our guests, or we're your guests. And today we have an interesting dynamic. We usually discuss things amongst ourselves with our guests, but we have a topic that we thought would be really important to talk about, not just now, not just this evening, but during this entire period. The history of journalism is replete with all sorts of examples of great gains, great losses. The history of journalism in Kenya is specifically very, very rich. But this present moment that we are in right now, we know journalism and voice is under threat from very serious powers, and also under threat from disinformation, and under threat from the power of narrative, right? It should be something that we work with, but it really is something that we also have to contend with. So this evening, we wanted to break down some of our thoughts about why it's important. Why it's important and how journalism builds and breaks narratives and builds and breaks societies. So we have, as you've heard, a slide presentation that you can go through. It'll be shared. It's on the Drunken Lectures group. So I'll spare you much of the history, but it does talk about the origins of journalism, how we got here, and where we are today. And I think it's important for each of us to consider, given that these days news comes on your phone. When I started journalism, you didn't have anything like this. News was an instant. The speed of news was very, very slow. But they... On that note, wacha niache vijana waongee. I'll just see.
So the history of journalism, as you've heard, is mostly with John Allen, but
Allegedly.
but for Kenya as a country, the history of journalism began with very critical points where it was mostly vernacular and Kiswahili. Particularly Kikuyu was one of the biggest ways that news was dispersed. But I think it's kind of weird because if you were not able to read, you had to go with word of mouth. So it's mostly vernacular and Kiswahili. I think Taifa was the first newspaper that was launched in 1960, if I'm not sure. Yeah.
And then after that came Taifa Leo, Daily Nation, all come in the early 60s. Then fast forward to 1990s, Moi is fading out kidogo. Akina Gitobwe Majara come up with Nairobi Law Monthly. Gosh, I struggle to get that. Nairobi Law Monthly. And he was arrested for that paper and accused of publishing seditious content, which is exactly what all of you are being accused of. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my criminals. And so, yes, fast forward to now 2024, a lot of TikTokers, a lot of mic check pods, all these, Akina Ikonini, all these folks have a bigger platform, and Obina TV, a bigger platform than you'd see on 9 p.m. news on mainstream channels on YouTube. So that's the evolution of media, from newspapers all the way to Obina, Ikonini, and us. And Justine is a source as well, so Justine. Janala?
All right, so I think the first place to start is with language. Language, perception, and I added a little thing about why KTN Leo doesn't get enough credit. So when you think about anything, so if you're to do like a math sum, do you calculate in English or in Kiswahili?
Kikuyu.
Kuna wengine wanasema Kikuyu, na wengine wanasema Kiswahili. Kikuyu. Most of us who've been, in this space, many of us will translate in English, will calculate in English. And that's a construct of how we grew up, where we grew up, what we learned, right? But language is an incredibly powerful thing when it comes to how we frame our thoughts, how we frame our ideas, or how our ideas are framed for us. So it's my contention that, number one, we all know that colonialism did a huge number on us, right? It robbed us of so many things in terms of our culture, in terms of how we communicate, but specifically in terms of language. This is one very big and very divisive area that we don't often think about. When I joined the newsroom, there were 2 news bulletins. About 5 years before that, there was only 1 news bulletin, and it was in English. When KTN Leo was launched in the early 2000s, that was a sea change, because how colonialists, especially through colonialism and afterwards, how English was interpreted was as a language of sophistication, of deep thought, of kizungu mingi, basically, when you think about it. And how Kiswahili was interpreted, Kiswahili as well as the other languages that we speak, were languages now for the masses. So if I was speaking right now in English, and you guys were all, subjects of the colony Mkibeba Kipande, you'd think of me as a colonialist, in a sense, as a person who is of superior knowledge, superior weaponry, etc. Those kinds of perceptions seep into our culture and become part of how we relate on a day-to-day basis. And this is why many times when news is interpreted in English, right, it speaks to a certain crowd, it speaks to a certain audience. But it should actually be the other way around. And my contention, or rather my thesis, is this. How many of you guys remember Jichopevu? How do you remember Jichopevu, the product, eh? Najua kuna wengi hapo mko na maswali mingi. Those ones we shall answer later. But Jichopevu represented a sea change, in my view. Jichopevu was one of the first times we had deep, investigative, complex and sophisticated thought presented for the masses. How many of you guys remember the inside story? Much fewer people than do remember Jichopevu. And that's interesting because Jichopevu would run at 7 o'clock, and Inside Story, presented by me, would run at 9 o'clock, right? Now, I a long time ago made my peace with that issue. Why? Because when you speak to someone in English, you're speaking to, I guess, a level of logic, etc. But when you're speaking in Kiswahili, you're speaking to the heart, right? And this is why Jichopevu, as well as many other of the vernacular stations that then came up and started to present these kinds of issues in languages that people felt in their hearts, was truly important in terms of language. One other example that I'll give, just to broaden this a little bit, was last year. How many of you guys follow Mushiri Mike? Right? Right? Is he here?
No.
Kama yuko amehata lakini. What Mushiri Mike encouraged a number of people to do last year during the finance bill, in translating the summary of the finance bill into different languages, was a rebellion against the running order of things, against the status quo. In that, people who weren't engaging with the numbers, with the hard facts, with the evidence, and were just being told, vote for this, don't vote for that, were now engaging directly. So language as a construct is crucially important in how we present our thoughts, how we share our ideas, and how going forward we will rebuild a society in this country. So if you want to consider how news should be important, consider language first. Consider how you think about things and who you present those thoughts to, right? I think I'll stop there. I'll come back a little later, but Justine, you can pick up from there.
Yeah. And then
Sorry, Tom.
Me, yeah?
Yeah.
My take is a lot of the sources that we see on TV don't have to be on TV. I'll give you a quick example of one thing that happened internally. I asked for permission before giving this story, by the way. Yeah, I'm Dosi. But Allegedly. So, allegedly, the government spokesperson, Isaac Moura, he has a lot of names in these streets. He approached Uncensored and the Big Picture, this program specifically, and asked to come to the show. That was right before June 25th, right before the Mandamanos for this year picked up. And I remember us having a discussion, and Justine and I getting on a call for 1 full hour. And my take was that let's get him on the show. Let's grill him. Let's pull down his pants and expose him. You understand? The hard questions make him look stupid on television. Journalists are supposed to ask hard questions. Indio. Justine's stance was let's not have this guy on the show. And she had a very interesting point to prove. She said, guys, this guy is not going to tell us anything important or anything new. He's basically garbage in, garbage out. He says what the government wants him to say. At that time, I think we were having a discussion about the finance bill, and the conversation was meant to be intellectual and smart, and he gives us reasons why the government is doing X, Y, Z. But every single time this gentleman gets on TV, he says nothing important. He just regurgitates the government's narratives. But what do you see every morning at 7 o'clock when you wake up and turn on the TV? You see him on TV. You see other folks who defend terrible, terrible things on television. I'm going to do a quick poll here. Do you guys want to see 2 people from government and 2 people from our side on TV every morning? Why is that? Let's listen to her. You said yes.
See both sides on TV because
Yeah.
there's the danger of a single story.
There is that. But my thing is that every time somebody gets on TV, we have a Charles Owino moment where he says Boniface Karuki deserved to be shot. That's the problem with that. I think the truth and the government stance, you don't need as a journalist to stand equidistant from both. You don't need to be in the middle. Journalism is meant to be on the side of the people at all times. That's the hill I'm going to die on. So every person you see on TV is subtly shaping your opinion on issues all the time. We didn't have Isaac Mwaura on our show because he wasn't going to say anything important. He was going to justify the murder of people. He was going to say that more people need to be murdered, and he was going to say probably something even worse, even insult one of us. But every person that you, another good example, you all saw documentaries on June 25th, but there are certain documentaries that didn't resonate much, specifically because they didn't have people like you and I. They had 5 people from the government and 2 folks from one side, and the entirety of the documentary was the government saying what it wants to say throughout. So every time Jonalan asks us to go to the field, we always consider that. Which person are we going to have on our documentary? What are they going to say? Because that's extremely important. Journalism doesn't have to be equidistant from the right or the left. It should always and always be on the side of the people at all times. So yes, I hope you come out of this thinking about everyone you see on television every 7 o'clock in the morning. And the reason Mike Check podcast and all these podcasts are big is because they have people like you and I on the pod, and they represent our voices. On television, not so much. Podcasts are taking over specifically because you have clean people on television, and they always have certain talking points. But those people come at a certain price. Most of the times, it's at the cost of the truth. Yeah, that's my take.
So luckily for us, we are the media now. They don't get to tell our narratives for us. And particularly because of my work, I have had to become very humble very fast, because you think you're the media, but you can also spread misinformation, disinformation, you can become the problem. So we are the media, but how are we holding the truth and reshaping journalism in the age of misinformation? I like to think, sorry, sioni vizuri. I like to think, is it truth or is it clickbait? Every time. Every time I click on a headline, I'm like, maybe this guy is lying. I'll give an example of when, I don't remember who it is. It could be any of the government guys who was like, what? The parents need to check their children. If you guys know that guy who say that, oh yeah, that guy. Allegedly. Yeah, so when you say something like that, I thought that was a lie. You know, like sometimes I click on Kenyan's headlines and I'm like, these people are lying. And then there's a clip attached to it and he's saying those exact words. And I'm like, hey, see, hata upe misinformation a chance. You know, like you're so bad, you're lying, it's terrible. So I like to think as a person who relays a lot of information to people, I have the responsibility to make it as funny as possible, but also not to lie. I cannot kasongo my way through things. I have to fact check all my work. So that's the difference between me and this government and a lot of other media that you see. And I'll also say, I remember when like the when Kenyans found out, like they found the cop who shot Boniface Karaoke. You guys remember? You guys did open source intelligence. Give it up for yourselves. I thought that was very impressive, but we can boil it down to what happened with the BBC documentary. Yeah? So like the journalism of someone who's really articulate, who's really good at their job, helped Kenyans understand how they can catch a murderer. And we were able to do that as a collective. We amplified the right voice. That guy is gonna go to jail, and it's because of you guys. So congratulations on that. And I said the problem with misinformation is a lot of people are usually like, just block that channel, just block that, that person's feed. It shouldn't appear on your channel, but on your timeline. But one of the things I've realized is these, especially if it's like the Ministry of Interior, if this is like a person who works in government, all these people are government officials, not just to us, but also to people who are outside. So even if all of us block them and someone in Sudan can still see it, and the narrative is like we are supposed to invade Sudan, and that is what the government is doing, it becomes a problem for the entire country. I'll give an example of the principal secretary of foreign affairs. I don't remember his name, but what he did was very dangerous. He shared a deep fake video on his timeline on X, Twitter, and that video was up for up to 9 hours. That entire video was a deep fake of Farid Zakaria saying that Kenya's support of the RSF, which is a military group that is literally killing, raping, pillaging from people in Sudan, was allowed, like they were allowed to form a parallel government here, and Kenya's interference was okay. It took a whole bunch of Kenyans to say this is wrong, but that's information that was only on X. If that information travels to another platform, who knows what this country's response will be like. And if a Kenyan were to show up in Sudan and they say, if you're supporting the RSF, we're allowed to kill you, we do have a principal secretary that is standing on those terms. So for us to be stopping misinformation, for us to stop it, we also have to realize that just blocking is not enough. We need to amplify the right narrative. We need to amplify the right voices. And I think just to wrap this up, I think Kenyans need to step in a lot, not just in their, not just like the front-facing part where on social media we are at. We should also do the back end of stuff. A lot of our parents probably do not know how to identify misinformation. So please don't bombard them with forwards, you know. Allow them to breathe, write very long explainers, because most of them love to read. They still have the attention span. So I know, yeah, I know a lot of us have lost it to TikTok and the socials. So I'll just like tie it to how, just to prove a point on how misinformation is spread. I don't know if you guys know that Americans had their own finance bill, Juicy, which transferred a lot of their wealth to the billionaires. And it was called Trump's Big Beautiful Bill. Yeah, it sounds like a BBL in parliament. Like, get it away. Yeah, it's like, get it away from us, you know? Or that's Trump describing his butt, I don't know. So that Big Beautiful Bill, a lot of the parts that were in there were not read by the Americans. And one of the clauses that was in there was you are not allowed to regulate AI for 10 years. So You guys remember when MPs in, I think in Central did not read the Finance Bill 2023, and then it ended up as a problem for e-teams? That's the same thing that happened, that one of their representatives, she's called Marjorie Taylor Greene, said she did not read the bill. She did not know that clause was in there, but that it had already been passed. So whenever you're faced with misinformation, you have to break it down back, not just to the people who are spreading it, but to the people who are likely to receive it and not understand what they are looking at. So I'll take it back to Jan.
I'm so surprised, Justine, you didn't take a dig at Sudi. Yeah. He couldn't read if he tried. But so the second part of my take is headlines versus the truth. Headlines like, so the main idea is that the headlines that you read on your phone every day sadly shape how you think about things. Protesters storm Central Police Station. Activists storm police station. Activists do X. And this has contributed so much to the bad image that Boni has gotten over the years, him as an individual, because the media can't help itself from saying things or attaching certain descriptions to him that are terrible. But the long-term framing of people, for example, the example that I've just used, activists like Boniface Mwangi and young people like us Gen Zs who are termed as a flame sometimes, a flame that is just going to burn and go away. Certain words that are used in newspapers and our televisions every day change how you think about things. So how, for instance, I don't know if you guys, I hate this word, Ruto's total man to define Farouk as a person. Have you guys seen that? I totally hate that personally. Just because it makes him to be this figure that is almost mythical, a figure that you cannot defeat. And the same thing is said about so many politicians in our newspapers, including the president. But every word that you see on your phone, every word that you see an influencer use, every word that you see in a hashtag. I know some people had issues with the hashtag that was trending a few days ago. You know the hashtag that I'm speaking about that everyone was sharing with their picture. Some people did. Some people did, to be fair. Some people did. And I wouldn't have an issue with that because words mean different things for different people. Perhaps you using that hashtag and that word being there brings back memories of 2007 to 2008 and it makes people think a certain way. Can't be too sure. But the things that we see, the words that are used in the media, and that's why we are the media, Justine. And it's not once or twice or three times that you've seen people call out TV stations for using certain words. I know it was very rampant during the protests, especially with one specific channel, allegedly. I'm not going to use it, allegedly. But there are things that we as journalists think about before we write paragraphs, before we write headlines, specifically because it can make our story send a certain message that it shouldn't send. So, yes, we don't have the easiest job out here. We have to think about each and every word. John Allen has, I remember he told me in the last story that I published, he told me, Kizungu kidogo, Kizungu mkuti. But, so that specific reason. So every phrase that we use on headlines is meant to shape opinions. And always remember, the job of the media is always to set agenda. It can be good, can be bad. You as woke people, I imagine all of us are woke here and we know things that are happening around us. You know how to spot them, but not everyone does. Not everyone does. There's a difference between the headline and the truth every day in your newspaper. Just be smart about it.
Just, uh, just, just to echo what. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you guys hear me? So just to echo what Tom said, the headline versus the truth is always different, and this is why AI propaganda.
Sorry. Before Justine continues, there's something I forgot to mention at the beginning. I think the Drunken. Can you hear me?
Mike.
Nishauta. I am. So before we began, there's something I forgot to mention. The Drunken Lectures crew here had a dream that they wanted to be live on television at some point. What we didn't tell them is that we are streaming live right now. So watu wa allegedly, watu wa ria, mshaonekana online kwa mtandao. Wow. So being on TV na being online streaming si ni nusu ya kuonana. But the guys online are struggling to hear what we're saying. So nitawauliza tafadhalini, punguza tu kidogo so that the guys online can also hear what we're saying and what you guys are going to say in the coming debate. Sawa sawa. So asanteni.
Thank you, Jan. So I was saying the problem with a lot of us right now, we are very dependent on online information. We are on our phones all the time. At least I am. And one of the things I've encountered while doing my work is a lot of AI propaganda and misinformation. I had to do like a very specific slide for this because most people think, oh, I can tell that's AI, but can your mom tell that's AI? Who my sister is a WhatsApp auntie. She does not know the difference between Jesus AI slop and a video that was created by an actual video creator. She's very confused on a lot of things. I'm just saying my sister is John Allen's age. Uh, So I try to help her as much as I can, and these are the things that I realized when I was coming up with this. A lot of AI videos. I'll give an example. I don't know how many of you are on X, Twitter, and you saw the video that the Ministry of Interior was running as an ad about the protests. Did any of you see it? So this particular video had, I think, a girl named Tracy who was like in the streets, and then she goes home and she regrets being out in the streets because it was destroying people's property, and it's not what she thought it was going to be in the first place, right? That lady is not a real person. It was all AI, and it used the likeness of a Kenyan to be able to relay a certain narrative. The problem with this is like, I flagged the video. I was like, you people need to be careful. Don't reshare this video, flag it, report it. If you can block this particular channel, that would be good. But it's also important to make sure that other people who are interacting with the ad know that it's fake, right? And then mtu kwa comment section akaniambia mbwa. Yes, hizo ni salamu. And I accepted the salamu, allegedly. But honestly, in that moment in time, it was like an eye-opening moment for me because I realized some people still believe once you block the info, it has blocked for the entire family. Like that was scary to me. So what I did was try to inform him about how his own likeness can be used against him. Because if that AI video is made and then it's shared and it's your whole face, like your entire face, someone has used your likeness, your voice, your mannerisms, and they're like, yeah, this is Justine out in the streets and this is what they're doing. How am I going to stop that video? How am I going to say it's not me? We have to go back to the source to identify it. And sometimes, because a lot of AI videos do not have markers that they're AI, it's very easy for a lot of people to believe. So these ads run not just on X, they end up running, being sent to people's WhatsApp groups. Again, they end up being sent to Facebook, and we know the Facebookers here. Any Facebookers in here? Yes. Honestly, I was asking just so I can have a moment of silence for your knees. You know, I was doing that specifically for your needs, but honestly, all different social media platforms run differently. So it's very important to know that not all of us are interacting with information the same way. And then the problem with AI propaganda and misinformation is also you're also playing into hyper surveillance. You're oversharing your information to someone who can use it in a bad way. Not everyone is using AI for good, so it's good to protect yourself as much as you can. Flag misinformation, decontextualize memes. Decontextualize memes. Tell people this meme means this and this and this, because not everyone who's seeing a meme has the same information that you have. You know, like it's not the end. It's like your entire life is just one long explainer. So just lock in, explain as much as you can. Don't get tired. It's the work that we need to do, and fight off AI and misinformation as much as you can in your personal circles.
Um, um, as that slide reads, as you'd see on your phone, activism in journalism. I'm going to first state my bias, as I've done since I started speaking. I think journalists in many ways are activists. But journalists, some of them tend to hate being referred to as activists, with good reason. But then, what is the place of activism in journalism, I'd ask? And is the journalist expected to state what causes they advocate for beforehand? Would you want me to tell you why I wrote a certain story and why I feel deeply about it? Why? Why? I'm asking. There's so many yeses on that side. Udaku. Come on, man. I thought we were doing journalism here, man. But yeah, Udaku is journalism. And no, I wouldn't. Because there are times I need to, and there are times I don't need to. There are times telling your story before the story is extremely important. Like, for instance, if there is any conflict of interest, if if anyone I represent in the story a certain way, actually, I wouldn't tell a story that involves a family member of mine because I might change some words to frame my uncle nicely when he's a thief. But I think in the core of journalism exists activism. And it's the reason we all do journalism here. It's the reason Justine does her videos. It's the reason she speaks and spreads information. And it's the reason John Allen was doing Inside Story years ago, because he cared about something deeply. But there are some differences that I want us to be aware of between journalism and activism. One is that the methods differ. For instance, we have a story right now, and a source might be asking, yo, just give me X amount of money and I'll give you this information. I'll tell you exactly what the government thinks about everyone. I'll give you screenshots. An activist, to some degree, is allowed to pay. I'm not allowed to pay. Secondly, the goals differ. For us as journalists, the goal is to put the story out there and represent this story. For change, it's not for us to make sure that this change happens as journalists, because it's too big of a burden to carry. For us, is to put the story out there, and people, and I think I'm one of you guys, should make sure that those things are followed up online using hashtags and campaigns, and I speak about them. But I particularly don't feel good about us journalists when we like to think of ourselves as pro-max citizens, like we're special in some ways. I know many of you think the same. At protests, we like to think we're special. And a specific hashtag caused a storm and made the word allegedly big because certain things were happening and journalists were treating themselves as if they exist in a certain tier above other citizens. I think the reason I went out in the streets to record, and I made this very clear to everyone in the office, is because I felt deeply about what people were going through. I felt deeply about it. I was out there because I cared. And that's the same thing with everyone in this room who Kanye behind the camera, to Sam who always checks out our investigations. They care deeply about these people. If it's a child you're interviewing, you care deeply about it. My thing is that journalism is activism in its core, and we need to identify as activists and not be afraid of being called activists. But don't be too outspoken about it, because the government sometimes finds. That's why I wouldn't say some things that I feel deeply about or I'm personal about, because it can be used as a weapon against me. But journalists should be activists, and a good example of a journalist who's been doing an excellent job straddling that thin line is Larry Madowo. And the government hates him for that. The government hates him for that. Another example is John Allen Namo, actually. So, at the core of John Allen Namo is the love for the truth. And another difference I failed to mention, the third difference, is that we as journalists are guided by facts. He's told me so very many times, your story ends where the facts stop. So if the facts end, that's where you kill the story. No speculation. I know you guys had a thing going on. Why speculate when why investigate when you can speculate? But for us, those things are the difference. But at the core of all of us who are in front here, everyone who identifies as a journalist in the crowd is activism. And I would love it if we didn't run away from it.
All right. I've been told that my knees are struggling, and I agree. So the next thing that I want to talk about, just to build on Tom's points and Justine's points, is a question of neutrality versus objectivity. And for this, I want to tell a small story. So hadithi, watu wa CBC wako wengi hapa. So how many of you here are aged 30 and below? Kuna allegedly mingi sana hapa. Aya. So for those of you who are allegedly aged 30 and below, you might not remember this story from your living memory. For those of us who are, tupatie watu wa online nafasi wa kusikiza pia. So for those of us who are older than that, you might remember this story. So the year was 1994. The month, hey, watu washasema we. Haya. Maze nilikuwa jamani. Nilikuwa. Na si allegedly. Guy, nimeitwa freedom fighter hapa. Jamani. That's slander. Anyway, the year was 1994. The months were between January and April. A storm was brewing in one of our neighboring countries. For years, 4 years prior, the signs had all been there. There were people who were being told that they're very tall and they must be cut down. There were people who were being told that they're cockroaches. There was arming that was happening. And somewhere in February, March of 1994, a huge consignment of Chillington. Now, Chillington was a brand of farm implements, for those guys who don't know, from the UK. A huge consignment of almost 600,000 machetes from Chillington went through the port of Mombasa, traveled up into Kigali, made its way into Kigali. Now, no, it's not allegedly, I saw the bill of lading, right? So what was the story internationally at the time? That there was a political crisis in a small African country. There was no discussion about how this political crisis had come to be, beyond the fact that there were peace talks taking place in a neighboring country. And then on April the 6th, the worst happened. A plane carrying two presidents, the president of Burundi and the president of Rwanda, crashed just outside of Kigali. And the rest is the history that we've now come to know as a genocide. What some of you might not have known and might not remember from that time was that it wasn't that the warnings about the genocide did not exist. They did. They existed, and they were taken up to the highest rungs of the United Nations. And it wasn't until the genocide took place that the world started to wake up. And the collective shame, the collective guilt drove people to action. This, for me, was a study in the question of neutrality versus objectivity and rigor, both in terms of international affairs and in terms of journalism. One of the things that drove me to be a journalist, interestingly, from that time was a cartoon that I remember drawn by Gadot. At the same time that the Rwanda genocide was taking place, there was also a genocide in the Balkans, in Bosnia. And the cartoon was simple. It was a map. It was a map of it was a globe. And on one side there was Africa, and at the top was Europe. and two streams of blood were pouring out of those two countries, those two continents. And that demonstrated powerfully for me that there was a problem that people chose to ignore, and it had to be done so viscerally for people to start to pay attention. Now, fast forward to October 7th, 2020, 2023. And the same happens again. We are 2 years into a genocide that has been broadcast live in 4K. And still, there will be those among you in this crowd that do not believe that that's happening because the voices on the ground have been painted as subjective, have been painted as too small, have been painted as Hamas, etc. But the bigger voices in the room, those who pull the strings at international levels, have called this a conflict, have worded it, remember our discussion on language, have worded it in a specific way so that on our Instagram feeds, you'll go from the wedding of Jeff Bezos, from something that I saw this weekend, from the wedding of Jeff Bezos to a child being held by their father, Chad. So is it neutrality for you to report what the Israeli government is saying and what one person from the ground who's suffering the impacts of that conflict is saying? To build on Tom's point, it is not. Because equality in representation on camera or in the or on newspaper is not equality of voice. We're having the same challenge here. Before the finance bill was read, before the 25th, before even the protests took place, how many young voices did you see on the news talking about the finance bill? It was the same talking heads. It was the same debate where you'd bring politician X and representative Y to debate the wording, etc., of the finance bill. They completely removed the context under which the finance bill was being read. Under the guise of neutrality, we missed, and I'm saying this of mainstream media and even of some independent media, we missed what the greater discussion was. While we were thinking about numbers, Kenyans were talking about opportunity and the lack thereof. Kenyans were talking about the fact that they couldn't get jobs, that life was becoming difficult for them, that the cost of bread wasn't just expensive for them, but it was a marker of how hungry they were in their homes. And this is why when journalists are told to talk about, are told to follow the principle of neutrality, that is a misnomer. We should leave neutrality in the dustbin of history. What we should be aiming at as journalists is rigor. How deep are your sources? How vast are the voices that are represented in what you're doing? And the same goes for the people who now hold phones and have platforms and are influential. When you are influential, you have a burden, you have a responsibility. The people on your platform deserve to know as diverse a story as possible. And this is the dilemma that we face today. If we carry on thinking that because I have Raila here and I have Kalonzo here, that means I have a story, then we miss the entire point of what truth-telling, what journalism and what media is. So the next time you hear a journalist saying, I ought to be neutral, tell that person that that's a cop-out, that's an excuse. Tell that journalist to be objective, to be rigorous, and to search for the truth, as opposed to sitting in that lazy place where neutrality is an escape, it's a blanket. And that way, what we do, because my entire thesis when speaking today is really about world building, and I'll talk about it later. What we are engaged in right now is a process of world building for this country called Kenya. And if we remain thinking that neutrality denotes some sense of objectivity, as Tom said, equidistance, then we miss the point of what is happening in our country. Let me stop there and let Justine take over. Oh, sorry. Actually, sio Justine, mimi nilikuwa nimesahau, niuze. Mesema, I'm not beating those charges, eh? So the final thing I'll speak about today before we have a discussion is on inconvenient truths and the cost of telling them. So this is a rather difficult one for me to share because it put us in a lot of trouble last year, but it was based on what we found on the ground. I'll take you again to the 25th of June, 2024. The protests had happened. Eric Shieni and the people who had been killed in front of Parliament had been killed. The president had made his pronouncement. But at night, in Githurai, gunshots rent the air for hours. And what came out in the morning was news of a massacre. How many of you remember that? How many of you believe that a massacre took place? So a good chunk of you do, right? We went to the ground. Actually, some people, I won't point them out so that they're not stoned. We went to the ground the following morning and we started to look. We knocked on doors, we spoke to residents, and we spoke to some of the credible voices in Githurai that were following what was happening in terms of the abuses that were perpetrated that evening. And for all of our searching, we couldn't find, at least not in the numbers that had been described online, we couldn't find evidence that pointed to a massacre, because a massacre denotes quite a number of people who were killed. We went out with that and we got completely just shat on, like to put it bluntly, right? Why was it that happened? Now, whereas many of you do believe that there was a massacre that took place, and we went out and we couldn't find evidence of the same, as Tom said, we had to report and stop where the facts told us to stop. But because what our reporting said didn't align with what the public narrative was at the time, we were told that we were pro-government, we were anti-Gen Z, and we were actually polluting the news environment. Now, this is the difficult line that we have to walk as journalists. Sometimes we're going to tell truths that are completely inconvenient and incongruent with what your understanding is of what's happening on the ground. But it's important that we do, because if we don't do that, if we're constantly siding with you, if we're constantly just, playing to the gallery, what happens to the people 10 years later who pick up their phones? I was going to say newspapers, lakini meona. Yeah. What happens to the people who pick up their phones and go and do the research about that time? They will be looking for evidence of something that many people do not have evidence of. A year later, on the 25th of June, 2024, we were prepared. We went out to the ground, we seeded, we shared our contacts and asked people for evidence of what was taking place. But fortunately, by that time, I think the public had learnt enough about why it was important to document for themselves that the narratives that then emerged about what happened on the 25th of June, 2025 were backed in very many places by video evidence, by empirical evidence. Now, for us, our world is built on fact. Our world is not built, around narrative. But this is why I think journalism is in trouble. Because facts are downstream from narrative, and narrative is downstream from culture. The final example I'll give you on this is this example. About, I think, a week ago, on Motai Ngunyi's Fort Hall, blah, 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 there was this video about the 1969 oathing ceremony of the Agikuyu. You might not have watched the video, but maybe some of you will have heard that story. That in 1969, en masse, young Kikuyus, Gen Zs of their time, were taken and had a massive oathing ceremony and were told to swear that leadership would never cross the River Chania. So that thing actually happened. But what it did is that it built stories that many in that community felt were true. They were told that the Luos had tails, that uncircumcised people could never lead, and that built itself up even until 2007. There was an expression that I talked about some time ago. Odhamakine yeto, dhamakine siao. If there's someone who's next to you who's Kikuyu, ask them to translate what that means. Okay. These guys aren't Kikuyu, so I'll translate it for you. I'll translate it for you. All right? What it means is this. It means that leadership, Odhamaki, belongs to us. Fish belongs to them. So it was building up of that narrative that had been formed. But that narrative has been so powerful and so enduring that it is part of the basis for why people make decisions tribally. Now, what you must remember today is that if narrative is so powerful, more powerful than truth, then the narratives that you share today, will become the culture of tomorrow. So if the narrative is that we are all Kikuyus, we are all one, remember, as Justine has said, not everyone has the same information as you. You need to be able to go out and continually spread narratives that you believe most closely align with what your culture is, with what your view and what your dream is of your culture and your country in the future. Because ultimately, the stories that we build today, the stories that we create today, our children will tell, and it's very difficult for us to be able to unmake that, even as journalists. Now, I can hand over to you.
Mmeona kwa nini yeye ndio mzee na wisdom. So, to wrap this up, I'm going to be speaking about how to relay information or narratives to a hostile crowd. I think the slides have changed slightly, but I'm going to read through. Can you kindly go back to not that one, not that one, not that one. Yes, thank you so much. So, how to relay information to a hostile crowd. I'll start with watu hawapendi kuambiwa. Nani hapa anapenda kuambiwa? Yeah, all of you kind of share the same sentiment, and I'm the same way too. I don't like being told because I believe inherently I can figure it out on my own. But that's a very problematic point to start because it starts with your own bias. You believe you know everything, so you can't be told anything. Unataka kukua the same place na Ruto? No, you want to be at a place where you can actually learn. So penda kuambiwa, please, and you can start interrogate your own biases when you're confronted with new information. Even if you're going to counter it with facts, counter it from a point of understanding, counter it from a point of you having the knowledge to push back. Otherwise, it just becomes you two people just kasongoing back and forth, and you don't want to do that. So an example of what happened to me, and I've told this story earlier, and there's something that has happened to me again. I have been in a situation where I told someone they were wrong about the information that they were pushing back against me. They were like, Justine, wewe and your fake news, mbwa. Another one, jidishi. Another one, ama sisi ndio wenda wazimu. And I'm like, that last one is valid. Maybe I am mad, you know. But honestly, those particular moments, I had to think, like stop and not try to fight back with very harsh words. I had to think, if I start talking to this person very harshly, they are likely not to listen to what I'm going to say to them anyway. So in that moment, ilibidi ninyenyeke, I had to like humble myself a little and relay the information that was factual. And they ended up accepting it because someone else also provided evidence. So that brings me to my next point. You should always find a way to agree to disagree, but not with with human rights. They're not non-negotiable. That's someone's life. You're not negotiating their life. Number two, always have empathy. Maybe the person who you're arguing with doesn't know much. Maybe the person you're arguing with is having a difficult day. Maybe the person who you're arguing with does not want to hear anything. So you have to have a little more empathy for you to put your point across. Number 3, you don't know everything, and that's okay. We si mjinga. Just because you don't know something doesn't mean you're stupid. That's a very, very wrong thing to believe. Yeah. You should always know you have room to learn. My primary English school teacher used to tell me, used to say this phrase all the time. We would all be wiser if empty heads growled like empty stomachs. He used to say that all the time. And when he used to tell us, we were like, oh, kizungu mingi. But when he broke it down and made us understand, it was like we don't know everything. And if we share the same hunger of our stomachs for knowledge, maybe we would be more knowledgeable. But that's not how knowledge works. You sometimes have to seek it. Sometimes you have to fight with people online. Sometimes you have to read beyond the span of a TikTok. It's hard. I understand. But like if you don't know something, that doesn't mean you're stupid. You can always learn, unlearn, relearn. Sawa? Um, Number 4, be willing to learn and unlearn again. And number 5, which is very important, facts are very boring, but they bear repeating. You have to repeat it in as many different ways as possible, because I'm pretty sure in our own families, in our own friend groups, in our own like all the spaces we have community, some of us are in an echo chamber, and sometimes you step out of it and you hear someone say something really silly or something you don't agree with, and you're like, eh, umse jameni, si usome. And like immediately that person wants to fight you because what they're hearing is not what they know. So facts are very boring. You have to probably do a lecture. You have to be like, najua utaki kusikia, but always repeat the facts. Always say the truth as many times as possible, because you guys have, I think if you're a lot on X, on Twitter, you've seen the white genocide narrative that was perpetrated by Elon Musk. You've seen the Nazi grok, where it like gives you Nazi facts when you ask about something very non-Nazi. You're like, what's going on with your AI algorithm? We've seen it in the way the protests are talked about by the people in government. They try as much as possible to make you believe that you are the problem. You are the one causing violence. And if you allow them, that narrative is going to be the predominant narrative. But the fact is, a lot of you are going out in the streets because you've been harmed by this economy. You feel like you don't have a future. So you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it. Maybe they're struggling with their hearing, but you repeat it, you shout it until your narrative becomes the dominant one. And so I will say, watch Fake Woke with Justine. I repeat so many of those facts. Thank you.
All right, guys. With that, we've come to the end of the present. Tulieni. Hey, siwache mzee aongee. Eh? So I was saying that we've come to the end of our portion of the presentation. Now it's time for you guys to ask any questions that you have. Let's keep them as questions, or if it's an opinion, let's keep it short. We've got about 15 to 20 minutes that we can do this, and there'll be roving mics. So I'll just ask one of you to raise your hand. So there's one over here, and we'll try and take a few at a go. And once that happens, we'll also try and be succinct, right? Oh, kuna watu wengi pia hapa nje. Mtafikiwa, msijali. All right. Where's the first question? And you can address it. Sorry, there's a mic coming. Wacha nimpatie. And as you're asking your question, yeah, so we'll take questions in threes. So we'll have one question here, then we'll pass to the next and to the next. And as you're asking your question or making your comment, you can either address it to one of us or to all of us, right? So you can go. All right, guys, let's give her a chance to say her question.
This goes to Justin. You've talked about misinformation. So my question would be, there are so many deepfakes. I'm actually scared of going to social media right now. So with the deepfakes, will it be really good in Kenya if we have a copyright of our own faces so that people don't do deepfakes of ourselves? And the last one is, People, when they open a social media account and they're giving out news, it's all about the amount of audience that you attract, which gives you views, which translates to money. So right now, it's all about how many people are. What is the footfall in my account is going to give me money, and which now comes to the question of I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Tom.
Tom, sorry. To Tom. So Tom, now this comes where people change up the title of what they are presenting in order to attract people into their platforms. So people are trying to balance standard of living, making money, and trying to tell the truth. So the title is misleading, but they are trying to give you the news. So how would you balance that out?
All right, thank you. We'll take the second question. All right, there's one up front over here.
Hello. I'll address the question to everybody, and then obviously you'll let me know. My question is about when we watch television, especially the news. I feel like the panels are not representative of the community, especially when it comes to gender parity. There's not a lot of women that we hear being put on the panels, although we have women politicians, women in law, and we don't hear their opinions. I would like to know who makes the decisions mostly for who is presented to us, because they obviously end up shaping our opinions, and how can we change that to make it more gender representative?
Great, thank you. One final question before we do our first round. Kuna mtu oh wait, where? Oh, so from out there, there's let me hand the mic to you and then we'll.
Thank you. So my question refers to what Tom.
Guys, first of all, can we hear what she's saying?
Hello.
Aya, tulieni basi.
Okay, I'm talking louder now. Can you guys hear me? Awesome. So my question is to Tom. You had mentioned that journalism is activism. My question is, journalism, especially as we know it today, is inherently colonial. It's like when I look at the history of journalism, especially like through the BBC, George Orwell, all the things, it was basically propaganda. So what happens when journalism is initially known as storytelling, where you're supposed to tell a story through your own narrative? Okay, I'm just gonna make it clear. I don't believe that you can give an unbiased story, because you as a person, your own biases still come forward. I think it's a matter of how often you examine those biases and question your positionality. But my question is, how did you come to the conclusion that journalism is activism? Because me, as far as I'm concerned, journalism is a Muzungu's thing. They're the ones who came with cameras, pictures. Like for us, especially, we're the biggest victims of journalism and wrong journalism. It's propaganda. Hashtag Africa is a country. Yeah.
I'll answer your question first. You asked about like so many deep fakes on the internet and like you're scared of open the internet, have fun. As much as I would like to be scared about what the future is, I think a lot of people are craving to hear from people who actually live their actual lives, not people on the internet or like a deep fake, unless the deep fake can find a way to feel exactly like a person. That maybe that would scare me. But until then, until the mid journeys of the world get to the point where I can be really, really scared because it looks like me and it can walk through my life, I don't think I'd be that scared. But secondly, I think a lot of governments around the world need to start protecting their citizens. I'll give an example of Denmark. Denmark have are proposing a copyright law to protect the faces, the likeness, and the voices of their citizens against AI. So if they use your face or voice or likeness in an AI video, you can sue the company for a lot of money, bankrupt them so they can never AI again, which I think is really incredible. The problem is if a lot of our governments are figuring a way to profit from them. I'll give an example of what is happening in the US. If they are not going to regulate AI, we don't know what is going to do. They've already deregulated it for people's copyright on books, on audiobooks, on anything. So it means it can take your voice, it can take your face, it can take anything without consequence because the bill allows them to do so. But if our governments are more proactive and more citizen led or citizen protective, we can have laws that actually preserve the human experience against the machine. So I don't have solutions, but if Sudi is in there, we are in trouble.
The first question that came from here. Sorry, what's your name? Oh, you didn't say your name. Okay. Do you mind saying your name? Ivy. I? Ivan. Ivan. Yes, I wanted to respond to you because you asked the question. So, misleading titles and the truth and clickbait for views. I honestly feel bad for journalists that have to do this. And I feel lucky that I don't have to do it. But I also know that people have to put food on the table. But that then comes at a bigger cost. I hope that it's so, should I say, harmless. It doesn't harm for them to put such titles. Like, for instance, an article promises you that it's going to give you answers to something and it doesn't give answers. I'm cool with that. Because putting food on the table is cool for you, no harm done, except for your 2 MBs. But there's a problem when a title reads something and it's misleading from the get-go, and it says something that is misleading inside. I think most journalists can't help themselves because we need jobs. Jobs are shrinking in the market, hakuna kazi, and a lot of these media houses that depend on clicks properly use metrics, how many people clicked on your article to make you stay in the job or leave it. You can get sacked for having very few views. So I understand why people have to do it in journalism. I am okay with it if it doesn't hurt the truth. If it hurts the truth, then all the backlash should be cancelled in general and shut down. Kila mtu ende home. I don't know if that answers the question. Yes. And a question came from there about how I came to the conclusion that journalism is activism. Journalism is a Mzungu construct. That's true. I hope that our journalism doesn't reflect what the Mzungus do and the biases they have. But I think we at African Censored, first of all, have defined journalism from our point of view as AUC. The journalism that you get from African Censored is shaped by, at the root of it, the truth. If the truth isn't there, the article doesn't go out. If evidence isn't in the article, if there's no documentation that proves any claim, that's not true. But then why I came to that conclusion is because from working with African Censored, you just have to be so passionate while you're working on a documentary, because you spend sleepless nights working on these documentaries. You have to care. There is absolutely no way you're going to go that deep into the country and find these voices and speak to this person who's shedding tears in front of the camera, kuelezea story, and you don't care about it. I really can't walk out of that place and say that I don't feel like I want something to change. And what do activists want? They organize around causes, right? Our causes change, and one of the problems with journalism is we get to be the pickers of which story we go with, which is a problem in itself. But then for me, it's the goals that I have in my heart every time I write the article and how much they resonate with people who identify as activists. And journalism in general just looks, there's a reason why every article is written. There's a goal behind it. Most of the times, it's in the public interest, is to seek justice for Boniface, is to find the killer of Boniface and jail him. And I believe it's the same thing that everyone who identifies as an activist here does. For me, it's just how much my goals align to them. And I think I'm an activist. I hate the word them because it removes me from that whole thing. But yes, I have to tiptoe around this because it's a problem in journalism in some circles when you identify as the A word. Let me say that.
So before I respond to your question, I want to disagree that journalism is a Mzungu construct. I disagree completely. And this is not out of disrespect for the point that you're making. I understand. But from my point of view, where I sit, you're confusing form with substance, right? And the form is the cameras, it's the microphone, it's the broadcast, right? But the substance of journalism has always existed in African societies. So you think about the griot, right, in West Africa, the storyteller who would tell stories at the court and to people. Journalism is the first draft of history. And the people who are keepers of history, in many ways, are practicing journalism. The same with our societies here. We had ways of being able to transmit news and information to different people across, it's just that we didn't do it at the scale that was done, that has been done because of the kind of inventions that have then now come to, I guess, build the impact of journalism, right? So the printing press, etc., and what happened going forward. But when we say that it's a Western construct, we remove ourselves and our stories and we devalue them in a way that as long as they pass through this Western prism, then they have little or diminished value. Remember, every time that we pass through a specific experience, and that experience shapes our reality. But the substance of what we say, the substance of what we do is where you need to be like really focusing on whether these narratives are neo-colonial or whether these narratives are speaking about something that doesn't truly speak to our experience. But if they do, if you can then go and transmit the same to your child, that this is the draft of history that I heard today, and it is authentic, that it represents me and my voice, then that is, in essence, journalism. All right? To your question, it's people like me who make those decisions, right? So editors, gatekeepers who will largely make decisions about who is picked. Sometimes journalists do, but most times, especially when it comes to shows, it's editors. So if you want that to change, continue to lambast guys who are constantly having manuals, who are constantly having, just one viewpoint. Like even here, if we were all of the, I was about, okay, this is for entertainment purposes only. If I said one term, how many people would respond? Aya. So now, if I interviewed you na umesema one term, na nikuhoji wewe na umesema one term, is that diversity in terms of voice? It's not. So it's up to us to continually look for those voices that represent the diversity of the opinions and the experiences in our country. All right? So there was, okay, let's do a second round of questions. Or do you want, okay. So let's just do a second round of questions. The microphone, kuna mingi? Aya, sawa, tutaanza hapo.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kivuti. First of all, allow me to give Alan Namu his flowers. Namu, one thing for sure, you've been real. And another thing I really appreciate about you is the mentorship process. I've seen Kanye do a feature. There's this guy, I've forgotten his name. I'm sorry, my brother, the one in a yellow hoodie. I've seen you do a feature, so we're simchoyo. So keep at it. Tukupe sahi. Tunakugesa hii sasa tusianze faint senye umeenda. All right. Something else. I want you to tell us in layman's language. The Englishmen say you can forget what someone has given to you. You can forget what someone has told you, but you can never forget what someone has made you feel. So I want to personalize all these things. Tunaweza kuongea Kiingereza nyingi, but I want to personalize it. I want you guys to tell us, especially being investigative journalists and such kind of stuff, give us a feel of the most riskiest session you've had. And then I want you to also, we want to give you a task. No, you give us a task. What do we need to do as citizens? Because you already are journalists. Whether once upon a time I worked for 1FM and NTV, but now you're journalists. What do we do to support? Because this room is full of solution makers and not problem makers. So what do we do to support what you guys do to make it a better place? And then the final one, is it possible for you guys in your level, other than showing us how people are dying, tuwatoe makosa na kuonyesha, we are having pedophiles, wanashika watoto. Nothing is being done about it. I'm now working in the old person space. A shosho is being raped. We are not talking about it. Perhaps, is it possible for you guys to also unturn the news to show the voices that are not being dealt with compared to the money that they're taking away? Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I think we'll pass the mic down this way for about 2 to 3 and then 2 more. Or there's behind you, actually. Sorry. Let's do series.
Okay. Hi. I hope you can hear me. Okay. So for me, my question now comes down to African journalism in general. And My example I'll use is, I don't know if you guys know African Stream. There was a channel called African Stream. And so for you, especially now in this space for as an African journalist, where you're trying to also explore and expose like other narratives outside of what like Western journalism would do. But now you can see what happened with African Stream, where basically they were told they were Russian propaganda just because for the first time we were getting news that was an African perspective fully. And I say this because like Al Jazeera, you'll get its news yeah Warabu. BBC, you're getting the perspective from the British. CNN, you're getting it from the Americans. TRT, it's from the Turkish. And I feel like there is, globally at least, there wasn't like a voice of Africans when it comes to the global, global affairs. And I feel like African Stream did that. And I feel like also for you guys at African Uncensored, you're kind of also filling in that kind of space where hopefully now you're also getting like viewers who are outside of Kenya. You're getting a bigger African audience. And that will probably be an issue again in the grand scheme of things. So for you now, right now, how are you dealing with that? Being censored even like by the West generally? Yeah.
Good. Acha. That would be the best.
Yeah.
Hi. So I have a question directed to Justin and also to the African Censored team. The first one to Justin is, are you licensed by the Communications Authority? Here I am. Okay. And then the second one.
Just to say it easily, I'm not licensed. I am a reactor. I'm a comedian.
Yeah,
That would be it.
no, it was not an attack, but it was a leading question. So the leading question, because she did ask, how are we able to differentiate between the fake news and the live news? You see, like for you to differentiate between between a real doctor and a fake doctor is through licensing. So that was my first question. And then the second question to Justin is, how is the proposed Social Media Act going to affect how you are telling the truth? Then the next question is to to Africa Uncensored. So I'd like to understand, how do you get your funding, and then how have you been able to navigate a situation whereby your donor wants you to dance to their tune, and how did you circumvent that situation? Thank you.
I think I can just answer your questions plus I am not a journalist. I say that all the time. I tell people the truth. I am a stand-up comedian. I am a writer. I am a satirist. That's the work that I do. If you watch any of my work, you will realize I use a lot of professional journalists' work because I know they had to go out in the field. They had to be out there and tell their actual stories. When I don't have the facts, I use my resources. As you've seen here, the African Censored team are actually incredible. So I never never regurgitate my own sentiments unless it has a factual source to back it up. Unless it's something that is purely in feeling, or it's something that I was immediately there to witness. For instance, when the protests were happening, I was in the streets. I could say this is what was happening because I'm saying it as someone who was in the street. So I do not have a license unless there's a license for a comedian that I'm missing. Niambie nisishikwe. Yeah. And is there anyone? Yes. When it comes to social media, I am worried that a lot of us are just platformed on social media that is built by the West. I would really, really hope that if there's any people with tech minds in here who can build a social media platform, to get the funding that you require so that we can have our own social media that is properly regulated and it does have our narratives at the forefront of it. I feel like there's so many social media platforms. It's just that they're severely underfunded. There's very little advertising money. So maybe where two or three are gathered, their friends know, but not everyone knows. So if there are people who have social media platforms that would want to have my work or like the African Censored work on, I think we can definitely platform our work there. But it's just a missing link between those social media platforms and our knowledge of them. Yeah.
All right. So I was asked a couple of interesting questions. I'll try and meld them into one. So first of all, what happened with African Stream was a huge shame. I think that we have an African platform, a Pan-African platform that can be forced to shut down simply because there is a much stronger, much more powerful voice that is claiming certain, something like that, without a shred of facts. That's a real shame, and that's the threat that we encounter as well. But I'll tie this question to funding, because African Stream, in my view, it was a platform and after my own heart. The reason why is because it was funded by the public via social media, via their platforms, via the likes and the follows, etc. Meaning that it was truly, at least in that sense, owned by the people, right? And it didn't have to justify where it got its money from, which is a problem or a challenge that we have. I don't know who asked the question about our funding. So to answer the question, we have two main sources of revenue. We raise our own revenue through commercial, through commercial work. So, like for instance, there's a series that I did on Showmax called The Last Door. That was produced and commissioned for Showmax, and that allowed us to pay a huge chunk of our salaries. But a big chunk of our money comes from donors, right? And in as much as I have nothing to hide in terms of the sources of our revenue, of what or what they do, it is problematic for me, right? And I acknowledge this with a lot of pain. It's problematic because
Guys,
all right.
wacha malize.
It's problematic because of the perception that as long as the money comes from a certain source, then a certain, tune is being called, right? It is problematic, and I deal with that, and I've been asked this question many, many times. But why did I choose to do that? Because at the time that we were starting, there was no local philanthropy to speak of that supports independent journalism. I had to look for people who would be able to support that. Now, to the second part of your question, what happens when we are asked to do something? There's only been one experience that I've come across. One. Where this person, actually two, right? One person, ilikuwa tu hiyo story ya Ukenya. Nimekupatia do, so nikatie kiasi, then now we'll, And I said no to that grant. The second one was a request from a Western nation. We'd like to give you a lot of money to go and, through our platform, through Akina Tom, do a lot of disinformation, misinformation work around Russia and China's influence in Africa, right? Now, that's not illegitimate work, because Russia and China do use social media to be able to push influence, right? But why was this particular nation asking that? It's because there is an information war between those nations. And if I were to agree simply because I have a company that needs to survive, then I would be the useful idiot in that situation. And I would be playing right into the hands of an agenda that I don't know or understand. So what you guys see is the propaganda. Oh, African Uncensored has Ford Foundation money, it has this, it has that. What you don't see is the struggle every day that I have to hold the line for my people to be able to do independent work, because I know exactly what it feels like to be told you cannot do this story because this person has paid or pays our advertising, etc. That's part of the reason that I left the mainstream media, because that was what was happening. So if there's any hill that I'm willing to die on, any fact that I will challenge anybody on any day, is if Africa Uncensored has ever been asked and has ever agreed to do something that they do not believe in. That has never happened. And as long as I am at the head of Africa Uncensored, I promise you, it will never happen. Because it is more important to me. It's more important to me that the truest, most diverse, and most truthful picture of what's happening on our continent is shown by us, right? Than it is for me to be able to keep the lights on. If that were ever to come to pass, then I'm sorry, Africa Uncensored would shut down. I would sooner go hang myself than take money from someone who, I'm just saying. I would sooner, okay. But you know the example that I want, you know what I'm driving at. I would sooner die than do something like that. Now, to answer the question again about unheard or unseen stories, that again is part of the reason why Africa Uncensored came to exist. We look for those stories that are hidden, those stories where there's challenge in terms of voice, and we try as much as possible to tell those stories. When it comes to platform, I agree. We have been largely Kenyan, but the stage that we're moving to is from being the people who produce brilliant investigative journalism to platforming the people who do brilliant investigative journalism around the continent. And one example, the most recent example I can give you, is a story about the Alliance Girls teacher. That was produced by a brilliant journalist who we worked with. She didn't work for Africa Uncensored, but we chose to stand with her, including going to court for her to ensure that that story goes out. So that's our commitment. I think maswali zilikuwa zimeisha ama kuna moja ingine. How do you support us? We're on how do you support us? We're on Patreon. If you want to commit money every month, you can do that. If you want, being a subscriber and sharing our content helps us build our views, right? But I think for me, beyond the money, the more important support is standing with us in times where challenges like the ones that are being presented to us and other journalists are taking place. We are under threat today, make no mistake. And it's important for all of you to be able to raise your voices, because if you believe, as we do, that the things that we're doing are truthful, then it's important for us to be there. Because if we don't hold the line, it's going to be up to you to do that as an individual. And it's a lot fucking harder to do that as an individual than to have someone in front of you standing. All right, last. Okay. Oh, Ankori. Oi. Doesn't. Itabidi sasa. So. Pole. Najua tunaanza usiku. Lakini lazima tumalizia usiku pia. Right? I'm sorry, guys, but we can't take more questions. But this has been a brilliant experience. Thank you very much for coming, for tolerating us, for listening to us. And thank you to the team at Drunken Lectures. This has been a brilliant platform for us to express ourselves. Like, follow, subscribe to Africa Uncensored on all of our platforms. And remember, the cost of telling the truth is high, but the cost of there being no truth is even higher. Asanteni, guys. To the guys who are online, have a good night or a good day ahead. Cheers, guys.